Canada get closer to the EU by potentially joining a major European defense rearmament plan? Will this move stop President Trump from offering Canada to become the 51st state? To talk all things related to the subject of Canada's cooperation with Europe in the field of defense, I'm joined by Roland Paris, Professor of Public and International Affairs at the University of Ottawa. Good evening, Professor. Thank you so much for joining me. I remember the last time we met was to talk about Canada's possible accession to the EU, and here we are today talking about defense.
Good to see you again.
Thank you. So why would Canada be interested in defense funding mechanisms of a union which is so far off its shores? I mean, why would this be a desirable option for them to consider? And is this a step further away from the U.S.?
Well, I think it's very interesting for Canada for a number of reasons. First of all, many of the members of the EU are also allies within NATO, so there's a long history of cooperation between Canada and these European countries, so they're natural partners and allies. Secondly, Canada is looking to diversify the supply of its military equipment. It will continue to be acquiring military systems from the United States, but also wants to make sure that it has a diverse set of suppliers. Thirdly, Canada, like the European Union and European countries, is about to spend an enormous amount more on defense. And it just makes sense to try and coordinate some of those investments and maybe even become involved in joint procurement activities, which would be more efficient for everyone. And finally, it's a way of strengthening Canada's ties with the European Union at a very moment when Canada is looking to do that very thing.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think would have to happen for Canada to be able to swiftly join the defense funding mechanism? What could be the possible obstacles, for example, or challenges in that process?
Well, I think that my hunch is that there's a great deal of interest on the European side as there is on the Canadian side, because these are natural partners. But of course, the devil is always in the details. So the exact mechanism by which Canada would be coordinating and cooperating with the European Union, I think that would be subject to detailed negotiation. I don't know exactly how it would happen. I would hope that Canada would be involved in some of the joint investments and joint procurement projects with the European Union. And Canada does, although it has not been spending as much proportionately on defense as many other NATO members, it does have substantial technological capabilities, and it would be bringing those to the table as well.
So boosting the defense is going to not only boost the defense itself, but also the economy. In what ways do you think that Canada would actually benefit from this sort of an arrangement, and in what ways would Europe actually benefit when it comes to economy?
Well, this is going to be, both in Canada and Europe, this is going to be a huge story. The extra money that's going to be spent on defense, of course, the primary reason for it is to ensure that NATO and our individual countries are in a position to defend ourselves individually and collectively in a much more dangerous world, and including with a much more aggressive Russia on the borders of NATO. But, given the amount of investment here, it really does make sense to be thinking about using this money in a way that stimulates innovation, the kind of technologies that can be useful both for advanced military equipment, but also with commercial benefits as well. So I think that the EU and Canada both have potential benefits here to think about ways in which innovation can be spurred by this investment, so that it's not just that they can fill gaps where we've been relying really exclusively on the United States in military supply, but also be reinforcing technological leadership, which has economic benefits as well for all of our societies.
Only a minute ago, you mentioned the NATO spending of GDP by Canada. At the moment, Canada spends about 1.37% of its GDP on defense, which seems to be a far cry from the existing target that is currently set by NATO. Do you think that this spending Do you think that spending more would be a condition actually for Canada to be considered by Europe as a partner, even though this spending refers to NATO obligations?
It could be. My sense is that there would be and I don't know what the details are of what's being negotiated, but that there would be an arrangement by which Canada and the EU would be agreeing to some kind of joint investments or joint procurement systems. But I think that the pressure is very much on Canada and has been for the last few years to dramatically increase its military spending. It is in the process of doing that, but it has a long way to go, as you pointed out. The current prime minister, the new prime minister, has said that Canada would reach its 2% target in 2030. But I think a lot of people in Canada, too, think that that's going to have to be accelerated and the target is going to have to be higher than that, which goes back to my main point about the benefits potentially of using this massive investment, both in Canada and Europe, as a way to strengthen ourselves and militarily, but also economically, and strengthen ties between Europe and Canada, which is something that my impression is that there's considerable interest in Europe in strengthening security and political and economic ties with Canada, and there's certainly that interest here in Canada as well.
So let's look at a potential scenario that Canada manages to join the defense funding mechanism. There is an agreement reached between Canada and the EU. To what extent do you think that this would actually further deteriorate the US-Canada relationship?
I don't think that it has to. Right now, Canada spends about 75% of its defense capital investment is made in the United States. I don't think it needs to stay at 75%. It could be somewhat lower than that. But even if it were lowered by increasing the investments that we're making elsewhere and partnerships, defense industrial partnerships elsewhere, including with Europe, the United States will still be the principal security partner for Canada. In addition to NATO, we have our own alliance with the United States for the defense of North American aerospace. Which is a joint command. Canada is not going to be turning its back on its partnership with the United States to defend the North American continent and to continue acquiring weapons from the United States as well. I think that, what is at stake here right now is trying to shift the balance a little bit in order to diversify Canada's not just defense supplies, and so strengthen those ties with Europe, but also diversify the Canadian economy so that it's somewhat less dependent on that of the United States.
So let's approach this from a slightly different angle because, the Truth Social account by President Donald Trump is a gift that definitely keeps on giving. We've heard that he has an idea of the Golden Dome, $61 billion, and he said it will cost $61 billion for Canada if they remain a separate but unequal nation, but will cost $0 if they become our cherished 51st state. They are considering the offer, end quote. Do you think that Donald Trump is actually considering that Canada would seriously take him up on the offer?
I would not guess about what is actually going on in Donald Trump's mind. He seems to genuinely think that Canadians would be interested in this deal that he's offering where Canada would surrender its sovereignty in exchange for some economic benefits. It's anybody who's been following the news in the last few months, the international news, will know that the response from ordinary Canadians has been one of anger and outrage at the suggestion. Donald Trump, by making these suggestions, is just reinforcing Canadians' sense of their own separateness. And if his goal is actually to kind of soften up Canada, the Canadian government and Canadians, so they'd be willing to consider joining the United States, then his language is producing exactly the opposite result. Nevertheless, we'll continue working with the United States. The United States is our principal economic partner, our principal security partner. We just want to de-risk the relationship a little bit now that the United States has been threatening, economic costs on all of its allies.
What can I say? Diplomacy is key, always and forever. Roland Paris, Professor of Public and International Affairs at the University of Ottawa, was my guest. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining.
Thank you.
And so this would be all for now here on World News Tonight, but please do stay tuned. We're back in just a moment with more news and features for you to enjoy, and we'll see you there.